the next Prime Minister, Andy Burnham. What's your message to him?
I would remind him that there is overwhelming public support for this change and indeed for going beyond what the government have said that they want to do. It is a no-brainer. And I would politely remind him of the manifesto commitments of the government. And at a minimum, you have to get those done. You have to get those done. It's not an option when you're a government with a huge majority on issues that have massive public support to not make that happen.
That's Emma Slawinski, the chief executive of the League Against Cruel Sport. The League is an animal charity that campaigns and organizes the resistance against blood sports, racing, fighting, and the like. I first met Emma in April 2024 when she was the Director of Policy, Prevention and Campaigns at the RSPCA, where she spent nearly 4 years. Emma has been an effective campaigner for a long time, and she knows how to read between the lines and what to look out for in the small print, and she's also heard all the excuses before.
It's just absolute nonsense. It really, I've been in this game a long time.
Above all, Emma knows that meaningful change takes time. So if you think that reposting a reel or clicking on a petition is activism, I'm afraid it's not. But if you want to learn how to become an effective campaigner, this episode is for you. Enjoy. Emma, thank you so much for joining the Wonder Dog podcast today. I really appreciate it. The first time we met, you were at the RSPCA. Now you are at the League Against Cruel Sports. Perhaps, first of all, tell us how this change happened and what your new role involves.
That's right. Yes. And thank you for having me on. I absolutely love this podcast and the way you communicate issues around animals. Yes, I am at the League. I've been here 14 or 15 months now, I think. And the move really was an opportunity to lead an organisation that I care about very passionately, that I've supported for my whole life. I learned a huge amount at the RSPCA, and it's been great to be able to bring that to the League. Of course, one of the challenges at the RSPCA is that organisation works on absolutely everything to do with animals, whereas at the League we have a much narrower focus. So that's been quite a nice change for me as well, to really concentrate on a small number of issues.
And yet we have so much to talk about today. So we have greyhound racing and why it still exists in England. We have dog fighting and the fact that it still exists at all, because obviously it's outlawed and also completely heinous. We also have potentially the end of fox hunting, another hideous so-called sport. And we also have animal testing, which I know isn't a sport, but it's an issue that you know about and that you care about. The reason why I started the podcast is because it felt like since the beginning of this year, perhaps a catalyst was the ban on greyhound racing in Wales and Scotland. It felt like there have been so many issues in the news about animal welfare and dog welfare. And I'm wondering, is this my little bubble that I live in, or do you feel that people are talking about these issues much more at the moment and there seems to be like a renewed energy behind it?
I think that's definitely true, that people are talking about them more, and the progress on greyhound racing was extraordinary. And as you know, those two changes in law came in one after the other in a very short space of time. And it felt like, oh my goodness, we're actually winning. This is going in the right direction. But I think what's perhaps interesting is that those particular changes of law came out of devolved government, so out of Scotland and out of Wales. And what we haven't really seen is big progress from Westminster. And the reason that's important is because, of course, the number of animals covered by Westminster law is so much greater. In Scotland, fantastic to have a formal end to greyhound racing, but there wasn't actually any live greyhound racing happening. So that's, I think, the interesting thing is the number of animals impacted. But certainly, as you've said, with animal testing, with the government's consultation on trail hunting and on other animal issues as well, they're talking about hen cages. They're talking, every single issue seems to be bubbling up. But there is a lot of talk and proportionately much less actual action. So that's where my concern lies, really.
But you are a professional campaigner, so I think if anybody can make change happen, it's you. So perhaps let's stick to greyhound racing. Wales and Scotland have banned it now. I don't want to forget about Northern Ireland, but it's a bit of a separate issue because the GBGB isn't really in charge of it. So it's partly regulated by Ireland, which has a lot of greyhound racing still. The big question is, why is Lisa Nandy, the Minister for Culture, Media and Sport, still dragging her heels? The last time she was on record was last year, where she said that the sport was apparently still enjoyed by millions, which I think is news to most people, and also that it brought in quite a lot of money, or that it was a good employer. What is your answer to that?
Well, I think there's a few things going on, and we really should celebrate what's happened in Scotland and Wales, because moments like that don't come around very often. So it's brilliant, and the campaigners, the coalition of different organisations have done an amazing job in making that happen. Of course, we need to see it actually happen. The announcements we made, the legislation's coming, and of course it's really important to think about what happens to the dogs, and there's good planning there, which is really reassuring. In terms of England, I mean, that's where the problem is. That's where most of the tracks are. And you're right to mention Ireland, because the route is that many of the dogs are bred in Ireland and then they come into England, and lots of them disappear on the way. Where do they go? I think there is probably some very strong lobbying from GBGB and friends. And the case they're making is around supporting areas which tend to be in lower economic status, supporting local communities, providing jobs, all that kind of stuff. Now, you and I know that's absolute nonsense. The contribution of greyhound racing to a local area or to a local economy is absolutely minuscule. And the ways in which the land occupied by the stadiums could be used in terms of social housing, community projects, all that stuff, could be so much better and making so much more of a contribution. And that's even aside from the animal welfare issues, which are so awful that it should be a no-brainer, that it should be banned, of course. But I think that's what's going on. I think there's a very effective lobbying machine on behalf of the greyhound racing industry. It's obviously connected into gambling and those big companies that are making a lot of money off of the back of greyhound racing as well. And I think it's the job of people like us to bust those myths open and to reveal that actually there isn't really an economic contribution at all in the grand scheme of things. Local communities often don't want this happening in their area. The number of jobs are tiny compared to what could be done, and to really emphasise just how bad this is from a welfare point of view. And you'll have seen there's some very good massaging, very good presenting of statistics to make it look as though injury rates are lower than they actually are, for example. So there's a real job to do to bust those myths open and tell the truth about this horrible, horrible sport. We always say kind of sport in inverted commas, because it's not really a sport, is it? The greyhound, it's ugh. So yeah, it needs to go. We'll get it gone, but that's the job that we've got to do to correct those myths.
Yeah, and to your point about housing, I found a study that Fife Council in Scotland carried out in 2023 before they decided to end racing at Thornton Greyhounds track, and they worked out that replacing the stadium with housing would add more than 1.5 million GVA in long-term employment. And also, of course, there's a construction of housing. I think in this case, it's going to be 29 new houses. So this whole idea about greyhound racing being so good for local employment and local industry, greyhound track versus housing, families, people going shopping, all that kind of stuff. It is a no-brainer, isn't it? But let's come back to gambling. So everybody I speak to in greyhound rescue and in campaigning always says this only exists for the gambling industry. I think the sport rakes in about $2.5 billion a year from betting in online and in betting shops. Now, if we take the general betting duty at the moment at 15%, that's only about 36 million in tax revenue. That doesn't seem, does it? So is it really just the betting industry? Because from a government point of view, it doesn't seem to be that much money.
No, well, it's not that much money in terms of tax revenue. And there's also a separate question about the proportion of that income that is going to support the welfare of greyhounds and how that can be managed or not managed. But those companies are becoming very rich, and those companies, the betting companies, are obviously employing people. They have their own ability to lobby, to create influence. My personal view is that if gambling didn't exist, neither would greyhound racing. There's no inherent love of the so-called sport that would allow that to continue. It is there purely to drive gambling. And I think particularly the kind of online betting televised approach is what's kept it afloat for this long. And I think something that's important to reflect on is, this is a dying industry. We've had bans in Wales and Scotland. We've had bans in other places around the world. And that's good news in that it will end. But it's very dangerous for the dogs, because as industries come to an end, that's when from my perspective, the highest welfare risks are, because people will desperately try to keep them going. They might be racing dogs that definitely shouldn't be racing. There's less money knocking around in the industry. So this is when we have to be really, really careful. And generally, gambling is not a good thing for society. And one of the partners in the coalition, the League Against Cruel Sports, is part of is Gamban, who are an organisation that really talk about the negative impacts of gambling for individuals, for families, for communities. So there's a whole host of social problems tied up with greyhound racing. We're a nation of animal lovers, as we keep telling ourselves. There is absolutely no justification for this sport at all, none at all. And the sooner it goes, the better. But you're absolutely right. We need to tackle that question around gambling, because that's what's keeping it going at the moment.
Yeah. Norb Gordon, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, who runs the shutdown campaigns overall network, he said that he's also seen people bringing their children to greyhound racing and encouraging their children to place bets. So they literally hold them up to the counters to place their bets. Even if you are going to go at it from a child safety perspective, I think there's so much going on there, isn't there?
I mean, it comes up over and over again, doesn't it? The idea that we're allowing children to witness violence in terms of the injuries to the dogs. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child says you have to protect children from witnessing violence. Of course you do. It's traumatic. It's horrible. So the idea that it's a fun day out to go to a greyhound track, to involve your child in gambling, which they should not be doing at that age, and then to be witnessing dogs having horrible injuries, it seems very strange to me, and we absolutely need to tackle it.
Yeah. So as the chief executive of the league, what is your strategy to get this finally over the line in England?
Well, our starting point is always working in partnership. So we work in partnership with some of the organisations you've mentioned. And what we try and do is bring together a team with different strengths. And the league's particular strength is on political lobbying with a small p. Influence, getting MPs to support what we're doing, getting them to take forward legislative change. And we do that through evidence. And we've just published a new report in partnership with Grey 2K USA Worldwide about greyhound racing. We rally the public, and some of our partners are experts in that as well. And we really make the case for the change, and then we support that process as it goes through government in terms of amendments, giving evidence to committees, those kinds of things. So that's our lane, if you like, is that kind of parliamentary political change. And what's really important then is working in partnerships with organisations who are shutting down individual tracks, or who are rallying the public, or who are tackling it from the gambling end or the social end. So I really think the more we can work together, the better. And that's our general approach.
After dog racing, shall we talk about dog fighting? Because that, to me, when I saw that on your website, it shocked me, because I know it still exists. I knew it existed in the US still. I know it exists in Italy, because I did a story for it a few years ago for Wonder Dog on it, and about how the FBI is working with law enforcement in Italy. I sort of had it no longer on my list for the UK. So can you give us an overview of what's still going on here?
It is sadly still going on. And in terms of the league's strategy, it's a bit of an anomaly, because most of our work is about trying to get things banned or the law changed to stop bad practices happening. And as you say, in this case, dogfighting is illegal. It's unequivocally illegal. There is a little bit of law in the Animal Welfare Act around the sharing of videos of animals fighting. It exists in law, but it hasn't been enacted yet, hasn't been kind of switched on. So there's a tiny little bit left to do legislatively, but it's illegal. But it does still go on. And one of the horrible things we find is that, dogfighting is horrific. Those involved in dogfighting are also involved in lots of other criminal activity as well. Drugs, people trafficking, firearms, illegal gambling, all kinds of horrors. So what we try to do, we have an absolutely amazing intelligence team who are real specialists in this, is we try to gather together evidence that we can present to the police of the dogfighting, but also any other criminal activity we think might be connected, and then the police take that forward to prosecution. So it's really about trying to stamp out the last remnants of this awful sport. And we had a really big case last year that covered parts of the UK, went into the Netherlands. These dogfighting rings are huge, and they quite often are multinational or cover big geographic areas. So there's a real kind of underground network of people who want to keep doing this, and it's our job to get rid of the last remnants of it. And that's a really important thing, I think, for the League Against Cruel Sports and for all of us, that the job's not done until it's totally done. Potentially, this is something we might see with greyhound racing. I really, really hope we don't, because, stadiums and that kind of thing, you can't hide. But, we have to be vigilant that changing the law isn't enough. We need to enforce the law as well and keep going until these sports are completely gone. Doesn't happen anymore.
One of the things that I learned when I wrote the story was that fighting dogs, for what it's worth, actually do make loving pets, because they are absolutely never to attack their person. They immediately get disqualified and probably put down if they attack their person. Do you have any evidence or any stories about fighting dogs having been rehomed? Because again, that's not something I see very often in the rescue world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to overcome for those dogs. I think, as you say, they will not attack people, but often they haven't lived in houses before. Perhaps they're quite often they're sort of kept in kennels in the end of someone's garden and that kind of thing. So the normal things that you would have in a rescue scenario, like dogs getting used to the sound of vacuum cleaners and washing, all of those apply. And these are big dogs. Often, of course, they perhaps have some veterinary issues as well. If they've been fighting, they might carry scars. There may be questions around their appearance and, the dangerous dog acts. That's a whole nother conversation that we need to have. But, these are absolutely wonderful dogs. And like any dog, they respond to the way they're treated. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to try and do some kind of reparation work for these animals who have been put in this awful situation and who can go on to become really loving pets. But I think it does take organisations with real specialist knowledge to know how to start to support those dogs.
Yeah.
But, my general approach, whether it's foxhounds, racing greyhounds, dogs that have been used in fighting, let's start from the position that they're rehomable, because there are very few dogs that just aren't rehomable. And then if the case is made that they actually genuinely aren't because they're too traumatized or whatever, then we can make an ethical decision. But let's start from the position that all these dogs are rehomable, and let's see how we can make that work.
Yeah, and I really do think that fighting dogs can be rehomed, even if they've been through the most awful experiences. The next point is another issue that is half outlawed, but not quite enough: fox hunting. The signature blood sport. Labour tried to ban it 20 years ago. Clearly, there were too many loopholes in it. DEFRA recently put out a consultation on banning trail hunting, which would effectively be the end of all fox hunting. Do you have any idea where this consultation is at the moment? Because I think it closed mid of June. Do you have any indication where this is headed now?
I mean, this is the number one issue for my organisation, and we approach it exactly as you said, that this is the totemic issue around how humans and animals interact with each other. The idea that it's a fun day out to go and hunt a fox is just ridiculous. And there is, absolutely overwhelming public support for seeing this ended completely. Yet the consultation closed on the 18th of June. We've heard from our connections in government that the response was astronomical, I think was the word they used, and we would expect that response to reflect public opinion, which is great. We put in a very, very long consultation response, as you can imagine, because for us there is a concern, because trail hunting was invented when fox hunting was banned as a smokescreen, really, to allow people to continue fox hunting. They're not following a trail, they are just hunting foxes. So banning something that doesn't actually happen might not get us that much further forward. It does need to be banned, but we absolutely have to also close down the other loopholes that you mentioned. So there are loopholes that allow you to hunt stags, for example, if you were doing so for scientific research. I don't see a lot of
Oh,
stags
that's an
going on there.
interesting research approach, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just all of these loopholes, all of these exemptions in the law, the fact there's no custodial sentences, you can only get a fine, all those kind of things. We need to take this opportunity to just sort the Hunting Act out once and for all and get rid of all of them. There shouldn't be any exemptions for this, really. So we see it as our responsibility, given it's the number one issue for the organisation, to really make sure the law gets it right this time and that sport is completely banned. There's no way in which it could kind of sneak back in the way it has recently. And, we know that in terms of the hunts that are meeting who are saying they're trail hunting, of the ones that were monitored, less than 4% even bothered to pretend to lay a trail. So it's just ridiculous. The whole thing's a complete sham, and we have to change the law to enable the police to be able to take action, because the law is so woolly and so poorly written at the moment. It's very hard to actually achieve a prosecution, even if it's quite blatant fox hunting.
Yeah, and it seems from what we see from hand subs, for example, that the police just doesn't even bother.
Well, it varies across the country. Some police forces are great, some less so. But to be able to secure a conviction around fox hunting, you have to prove that they intended to hunt foxes. That's a very difficult thing to prove. The fox ran in front of the dogs. What do we do? It's very difficult to prove. So that's why the law has to change. We have a lot of support from some quite high-profile police officers who really want to take action on this. They know trail hunting's a smokescreen, but the law needs to change so that they're able to enforce it. And I think then we'll see a dramatic difference.
Call me naive, but why can't they just start with muzzling the hounds? I mean, is that so hard?
Well, there's a whole different sport called clean boot hunting with bloodhounds. The main difference is the breed of the dog. And bloodhounds have not been selectively bred for centuries to chase foxes. So, but if you go out with a pack of bloodhounds, they chase a group of people, kind of almost in sight. Bloodhounds aren't super speedy. Let's be kind to them. They're more endurance dogs rather than sprinting dogs.
Here's the spirit.
Yeah. And the people ride horses and they follow the dogs. They can wear their jackets, they can blow their horns, they can do all of the things that people claim to love about hunting, apart from killing the foxes. And genuinely, in my experience, a fox could run out directly in front of a bloodhound and the bloodhound would say, please get out of the way, I'm trying to follow these people. So that's what I've always found frustrating, is that there's this real alternative that keeps all of the bits that people might like and just gets rid of the killing bit. And if people just do that instead, and we do see a growing number of these packs in the country, which is really positive, but we have to make sure that change happens and that alternative is offered up, because then it gets rid of all those arguments around destroying tradition and livelihood and all of that nonsense, because there's this genuine alternative. Just do that instead.
Exactly. Why is that so hard, right? We did another episode a few weeks ago about a very spirited group called Rehome the Hounds, because the hunters have now come up with this argument that completely banning fox hunting would lead to a massive animal welfare crisis and 10,000 foxhounds would all of a sudden be abandoned or worse. Now, Animal Aid has already pointed out that there is an animal welfare crisis because the fox hunters tend to shoot their dogs at the end of their quote unquote useful lives, and they don't always do it very well. So I'm wondering, what is your position on this argument that to me seems quite desperate about this dog welfare crisis?
It's just absolute nonsense. It really, I've been in this game a long time and things don't normally get under my skin, but this argument that You have to let us keep killing foxes, otherwise we're going to kill our dogs, is just nonsense. What's the starting point of that thought? And Animal Aid are absolutely right. Most foxhounds are killed at about 5-6 years of age. They're shot. We've got footage of dogs being shot and thrown in bins. You know, it's the idea that they're kind of loving pets who are now going to have to be destroyed is ridiculous. The government came in, where are we now? A couple of years ago now, with a manifesto commitment that they were going to end hunting. And if I were a responsible breeder of foxhounds, I would have stopped breeding them at that point. You know, why are you still breeding dogs for a sport that we know is going to end? The government have said they're going to end it. They've got a huge majority. It's going to happen. So I think the whole thing's ridiculous. We've already talked about the fact that, you know, dogs are rehomable. There is no reason why they would need to shoot those dogs. They claim to have a lot of support in the countryside, you know, lots of people supporting their hunts. I'm sure they could find a route for rehoming. I would expect that they were already having conversations with welfare organisations. And I know some, like Hope Rescue in Wales, for example, have already said, of course we'll help you rehome the hounds. They're not doing any of that. They're not doing any of the responsible things like reducing the number of foxhounds or having conversations about rehoming. Instead, they're just shouting that they're going to have to kill the dogs, which they do anyway, if we come along and end the sport. So the whole thing is ridiculous. And I think you're exactly right. It's a kind of last-ditch attempt to secure some kind of credibility in the animal welfare space. But I think most people see through it.
Yeah. Rehome the Hounds, when they started out, they also asked charities for pledges. How many foxhounds could you take in if the ban came in? And I think they immediately had 100 spaces where charities just said, yeah, we can take 20, 30, even if it's just one. So if anybody from a dog charity is listening to this, get in touch with Rehome the Hounds and pledge spaces for foxhounds if this actually becomes an issue, because just showing the willingness, like you said, from Hope Rescue in Wales, just showing this willingness, I think, is also a really powerful sign. So, Emma, the last point is not actually a sport, but it is still hideous. And sadly, you are also an expert on this very gruesome issue of animal testing. It concerns dogs in the sense that beagles are still used. 2,000 beagles are bred each year for the animal testing industry. We've seen recently a huge victory against animal testing in the US with the shutdown of Richland Farms in Wisconsin. 1,500 beagles were saved there. And yet here there seems to be very little sign of any change. What is your position at the moment? What do you see at the moment happening in government?
I mean, we had a really exciting moment when the government committed to, in the long term, in very soft language, but they did commit to trying to phase out animal testing with a kind of replacement approach, being able to replace it with other technologies that didn't involve animals, which was great. I mean, the government saying those words, however softly they were said, felt like a real bit of progress. We've also seen, and I think the results have come out very recently, the number of animals used in testing and the number of tests done has reduced slightly again. It has been reducing slightly each year. So, you know, those are good things because those are real animals who are not suffering as much or who aren't suffering. However, in order to tackle an issue like this, you need big, bold, decisive action. You need, in my view, deadlines. So regulatory toxicology, which is the sort of low-hanging fruit, the easiest bit to fix, that should have a deadline on for when it's going to go. And that would immediately remove many animals from this suffering. And the other uses, in my view, equally should have that kind of roadmap that says this is the point at which we will not allow this anymore. And therefore you need to get your replacements in for that time. Now, I spend a lot of time doing political lobbying, so that's the way my brain works of how do you actually make this happen.
Yeah.
But the passion and the fury that we are still doing this at all absolutely lives in me as well. It's an ineffective way to test anything, and the idea that we still think that it's okay to subject any animals to this is not good at all. I think the one kind of caveat I would have is shutting down testing centres is really important work. And we see Camp Beagle and others doing great job in that space and real dedication. We don't just want to move that suffering somewhere else. So it's really important that it's accompanied by work that's says you can't test on animals anymore, or you have to reduce it by this much. Otherwise, we're just essentially taking that suffering and putting it into a different country or a different location. So you have to have both of those things together. But the idea that we're in the 21st century and we're still doing this is just abhorrent. So, I salute people that are working on this issue because it is so tough and it's so gruesome, and it drains your energy because the horror is just so great. But I think there is the opportunity to make progress, but it's all far too slow. And I think we need to start poking the government quite hard on that issue. As I say, the league don't work on it. It's not a sport issue, but
Yeah.
it's time to get the pointy stick out and be
Yeah.
poking the government on that
Yeah.
one, definitely.
Well, there are many things I don't understand about animal testing, but one of the things is when it comes to lobbying government. So we had in 2010, I always need to shout out to David Cameron. Well done for actually, starting this whole hideous thing here, because it was David Cameron who gave the license to Marshall Bioresources to breed dogs for animal testing. That's on him. So this license comes from the Home Office. I understand from my conversation I recently had with Camp Beagle that one of the big issues why people still do animal testing is for legal reasons, to give companies a legal reassurance that they can say to consumers who have issues with certain products, but we carried out animal testing, therefore you can't sue us. If this wasn't the case, if a product went wrong in human application, these companies would be open to legal suits, basically. So as I understand from Camp Beagle, non-animal testing methods are cheaper. They're obviously more ethical, but it's the lawyer in the room that still says, no, let's keep sticking to it. So bearing in mind that the license for animal testing is in the Home Office, where do we come in with this sort of legal argument? Is this also a Home Office issue, or does this live somewhere else?
It's a really good question, because what you're pointing to is the complexity that we have here. And yes, that argument absolutely is correct, that the potential for liability if you haven't done everything possible to ensure a product is safe is greater. It's definitely no direct cause and effect of if you don't test on animals, you will get sued. But, the potential, and often lawyers think in that way, don't they, around, how do we remove any risk from this scenario? There's a few other things going on as well. So lots of companies want to sell a single product into many markets, and some of those markets might require animal testing. And so therefore they test on animals because then they can sell that product anywhere, even if some of the markets they're selling into don't require that. So that can be complex as well. And for some testing, and this is not for consumer products, but for medical research, where they're looking at the effects of a medication, for example, on a whole animal system, including human animals, they haven't yet got a good alternative. Now, that's then an ethical question around, well, then you don't get that drug.
Yeah.
That's where I would sit, but other people
Yes.
in a different position on that. So there's a lot of complexity going on there. But yes, I mean, the short answer to your question is, the reason we need the Home Office to fix this is because it is so complex, and they're the central office that can bring together those different government departments around the science, around the legal position, around the commercial aspects. They're the sort of single place that those can come together and be solved. It's a really knotty issue, and the only progress I've seen from a legislative point of view is this kind of roadmap idea of what are the different ways in which animals are used, and how do you build a sort of roadmap that sets out how you're going to end them. And that feels really slow and really incremental to something we should just be getting rid of overnight. But perhaps that's the way we can make some progress. And that's a very Home Office approach to say, in X number of years, we will have achieved these things. And it gets very frustrating when it's an issue that, you care about so passionately. But I think that's probably where the progress can be made.
Sir Keir Starmer just had his last Prime Minister's questions this week. What is your assessment of Starmer's legacy for animals?
Well, the government has a animal welfare strategy that they announced at the end of last year, which is all right. It's pretty good. It's got some big things in there. It doesn't have the whole-scale reform of the really big stuff, get rid of factory farming, end animal testing. It's not up there, but it does have entrail hunting, cages for certain animals in farming. It has some good stuff in it, which is great. And I'm really pleased. But that came in at the end of last year. They've been in government for quite a long time before that. And what they're doing on that strategy in terms of the things they've said they're going to do is they're consulting. So they're asking lots of people about it and they're consulting. And for me, that just doesn't line up with a government with a huge majority who can, they said they were going to do these things. They should come in and get them done. And so I think my sort of summary of my response would be, they've talked a good game, they've written a good strategy, but in terms of actual action from Westminster, as I say, setting aside Wales and Scotland, I would find it really hard to say a single piece of animal welfare legislation that's come through since Keir Starmer came in, since that government came in. And that doesn't mean they haven't been doing anything, because we have had the strategy and the consultations, but we should be much further along than we are by now. So, yeah, quite a bit of disappointment around the timelines.
Yeah. And I always find it strange when people then say, oh, it's been a busy time. And yes, I know there have been wars, plural, now going on in the world and other, huge upsets and tragedies. But surely animal welfare sits again in the Home Office and in DEFRA, right? I mean, these departments shouldn't have been affected by these global catastrophes and tragedies, right? I mean, these departments should have the time to do something on this.
Of course, I think that because of my background. I mean, most of our work is directly with DEFRA. DEFRA also look after water, which is a massive issue at the moment in terms of pollutions of rivers and streams and how water companies are behaving. They, of course, cross over with lots of the climate change stuff and mitigations there. So there is definitely challenges around political time and the civil service resource to get animal welfare stuff done. But my solution to that would be to therefore have more resource and to create more time, not to say, oh, we haven't got it, we can't do it, because these are really important issues. So I'm hopeful that by the time we get to the next general election, if that stays in 2029, then we will have seen quite a lot of progress, but it's all definitely kind of loaded into the last part of the political term. And I would be feeling much happier and more confident if we've got some of those things ticked off in the first couple of years rather than leaving it all to the last couple of years.
The next Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, what's your message to him?
Well, generally, he's pretty good on animal welfare stuff. Certainly from the issues the League works on. It's okay. So that's a good start. I think I would remind him that there is overwhelming public support for this change and indeed for going beyond what the government have said that they want to do. There is a really clear scientific case for making this change and all of the other benefits that we know that come with making animal welfare progress. So it is a no-brainer, and I would politely remind him of the manifesto commitments of the government, and at a minimum, you have to get those done. You have to get those done. It's not an option when you're a government with a huge majority on issues that have massive public support to not make that happen. So I would gently and kindly remind him of those things and then offer our support in making them happen.
Sounds very sensible. And nothing less from a seasoned campaigner. Emma, before you go, your cute little dog stuck her nose into the camera. Would you hold her up for those of us who are watching?
Do you know, I would love to, but she's wandered off somewhere.
Has she? Okay, fair enough.
Come back.
Well, I have now 2 dogs. I had, during this conversation, our second dog coming in. So I apologize for any noise in the background.
Here she is.
Oh, hello, beautiful.
This is Coconut. She's called Coconut, so she gets called Coco a lot. I got her when I was at the RSPCA. She's rehomed to us, and she's supposed to be a cockapoo, but she came from a puppy farm scenario, so she's some kind of mix of dogs, and she is absolutely wonderful. I have a son, and she is so tolerant and kind with him, and she had lived previously in the middle of London in a high-rise apartment. She'd had very few walks or experience of the outside world. And I live in the middle of the countryside. And she was terrified of pigeons, terrified of sheep, which is quite helpful from an animal point of view. Just tractors, all of the countryside stuff she found very scary, but she's much, much braver now.
Well, that's brilliant. I interviewed Amelia Steele, a wonderful dog trainer, about taking your dog to the countryside for the first time. And I explained to Amelia that the first time I took my dog to the seaside, she had never seen sea foam before.
Oh,
The spray from the waves, basically. I mean, I did not have that on my list of things that could be scary. But,
that's funny.
yeah,
Coco we went for a walk the other day, and she's scared of pheasant, and the pheasant flew up in the air, and
right.
she ran and hid behind me because of this terrifying creature that had burst up out of the ground. So she's definitely much better. We've had her about 5 years now, and she's much better than she was, but some things still surprise and terrify her.
Very sweet that she hides behind you. She clearly feels very safe and cared for.
Oh, that's nice. I think she just hoped the pheasant would eat me first.
All that. Bless you. Emma, thank you so much. I always enjoy talking to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Well,
And
likewise, and
yeah,
thank you for everything you're doing about communicating these issues, because it's so important that people hear about them. So yeah, thank you.
so much from Emma Slawinski. You can find the links and further information to everything we discussed in this episode on Wonder Dog's Substack. This was episode 10, and since it's late July, I'm going to take a break now. This podcast came about a little bit by chance, mainly because I can't shut up talking about dogs and dog welfare, and because Wonder Dog magazine is taking a bit of a break. I'll be back in September with interviews including the Camp Beagle and filmmaker Jerry Lopez. I'm also working on some deep dive episodes, including what's going on in Romania. We're also going to talk about dog cancer and grief. Please support my work by subscribing to Wonder Dog's new Substack. You can either become a free subscriber, or you could become a paying subscriber for £8 a month or £80 a year, which gives you access to our chat community and to the occasional Zoom event. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in to this experiment of a podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. Have a great summer and cuddle your dogs from me. And I'll see you again in September. Goodbye.